Okay, so we're here to casual debate my argument that we should define veganism as an animal products boycott, which is primarily against animal agriculture, if we want to end animal agriculture fastest, and not my debate opponent's six-point definition, HSD. So the argument I'm going to be making is that if boycotts can be an important element to political movement building, I think boycotts are in the case of animal rights, then the Vegan Society were irresponsible for trying to come up with various sectarian definitions for a way of life which people already have a colloquial definition for, in that these are people who boycott all animal products, and some of them go further in being animal rights advocates. Like the word libertarian, the positive original vision has been obscured or run away with entirely, as libertarian used to stand for the democratization of the means of production, so enlightenment liberalism or left anarchism. I don't know if it's productive to push for my preferred explanation of veganism as the most universally useful one going forward, but here are my thoughts on my own preferred definition. So I hope it's the best one going forwards, but I'm open to hearing arguments for the opposite. So veganism as a boycott campaign, an animal products boycott. The ethical foundation is that, first and foremost, it's a behavior, so not an ethical principle. Like how heroism means to act bravely. So the principal reason for why someone is colloquially a vegan would be contained within a separate identity, like what it necessarily means to be a legal animal rights advocate. The pros, I think, are that it has clear and simple implications and is historically accurate to why the Vegan Society came about. And it has broad appeal for other liberation causes like anti-racism and anti-sexism, to see it as a strategy of action which is useful for their struggles also. And it makes explicit it's a campaign tactic and leaves room for combination behaviours like freeganism. So I acknowledge that one con is that sometimes less useful definitions still win the day for becoming the most often used. So it may be a useless exercise attempting to convince other people and organizations to use this explanation. But as for my preferred definition of legal animal rights advocate, it's a person who seeks to gain collective legal rights for non-human animals to have a refuge in dense wildlife habitat where they aren't subject to human cruelty, with a few exceptions where the law is overridden by right to self-defense or special dispensations from the government, for example, to practice some scientific testing, as well as breed and keep guide dogs for the blind. So this gets at the heart of my argument that I think we need to be pragmatic. So like with special dispensations, I think it's important not to look like dogmatists. So research, for example, which shows an entertaining movie projected onto the wall of an injured chimpanzee's room, as well, where we're fixing them up before releasing them back into their wild habitat, and we're simply tracking their eye movements in order to learn more about them, like in the false belief test. And with service dogs, I can just imagine some worker co-op with hundreds of acres giving dogs the best life and just doing like a few hours a week rotations where they're enjoying being trained to help people. I wouldn't say it's possible with any other animal, but as dogs are the only animal to have co-evolved alongside humans longer than any other, it's interesting to think about. So I've got loads more to say, but I can leave it there for now. What do you say, HSD?
I think I definitely should pay more attention to what you said originally. So you wrote posts originally, which this is completely my fault, which is primarily against animal agriculture if we want to end animal agriculture as fast and fastest and not your 6-point definition. So like basically your definition is just with the goal of ending as quickly as possible. So for the sake of having a fun debate, I still want to do this. But I actually have to admit now I'm a bit more of an uphill battle now I think about it with the proposition I agreed to. But with that being said, I would like to present my definition. So there's 3 particular reasons why I take an issue with this. Is number 1, if it's not condemning other potential behaviors to harm animals, it could also lead to someone else morally justifying other said behaviors. So we can condemn a agricultural industry, but if we don't necessarily always condemn the reasoning behind that industry exists, then somebody can end up philosophically justifying that industry potentially down the road. So that leads us to the conclusion of trying to actually create some sort of philosophical aspect, including like a way of life for veganism. So Second thing is actually when it comes to making a moral obligation for somebody who lives in poverty. So, for example, somebody who lives in poverty who's not in a position to adopt a vegan lifestyle or a vegan diet or vegan ethics, they might actually feel like as if they might feel like this conversation does not include them or involve them, or they themselves cannot necessarily have a discussion on this or be vegan. I think it's important to include these people and having a discussion about animal-based ethics, which we could do with or without this definition. But I think the value of my definition is it places an emphasis on ethics, thus meaning that when the moment somebody actually climbs into a better socioeconomic status, that they would actually more so adopt these types of behaviors. I think I think it's more marketable to people in poverty. And then third is at any point somebody obviously could become impoverished, or somebody might necessarily need to support these industries in order to survive. But with that being said, I actually would like to read over my definition, which is pretty fucking long and lengthy. Do you mind if I quickly go over it, or is that too long?
Yeah, no, of course, go for it.
Okay, vegans. So there's 6 things that all vegans ideally have in common. Now I have notes for this definition, but for the sake of making it nice and quick and short, I'll just say this much. This is more so based on animal ethics. This is more of an animal ethics type definition. Vegans are people who ideally do not wish to make sentient beings suffer, or cause said suffering, or value right to life and liberty, regardless of pleasure or use made from them. I should have wrote right to life or liberty for a sentient being. I'm probably going to make an edit to that. Each vegan has a personal philosophy that can be diverse for rights and or values for sentient beings. 3, the wish to not make sentient beings suffer, to make sentient beings not suffer and or harm, creates a desire to take action against said suffering if options are available on some level of consistency. And yes, I know I need to spell check this. The level of consistency is a spectrum based within both actions and beliefs. The level of consistency can be both in one of the following: moral value of life, logical definition, personal ethical consistency. Also, each species, species consideration based off priority, emotional intuition, or life. There can be a useful mixture of all positions. The philosophy leads to trying consistently to replace products and services that cause harm and suffering to sentient beings, normally judged by comparison of the alternative and based off of its requirements of suffering in production, and if sentient beings can advocate for themselves or have institutions empowered to do so. The goal with this value is to take responsibility for at least the demand you create in the market. Number 6, all the above leading to a way of life that seeks to uphold value and or consideration for sentient being above product, service, slavery, addiction, profit, pleasure, peer pressure, or use made from them. Not to say that you cannot use sentient beings, but however to try and value and consider them above said use within your system of ethics. The spectrum of valuing sentient beings primarily focused on non-privileged sentient beings. Conclusion: veganism is a system of ethics with a spectrum that can fit many different values with a few key similarities.
Okay, yeah. So I'm happy to do like a debate about which kind of animal rights philosophy is better. The main argument for this debate prop is going to be more semantics about the term vegan came about at a particular time in history, and like I'm really happy when people become like activists and take on all these really like laundry long list of ethical principles and go out and do loads of actions. But I don't think veganism should be exclusive to people who hold loads of all these ethical principles. I think you need terms for every rung of that, like how active a person is and how ethical a person is, because it's like a basis to find people among. And so, like, if people were, it would be like a real disservice to the animals if people were shy about identifying as vegan just because they've only gotten to the step of boycotting all animal products. So you said something about people might not feel included in my definition, but it's the broadest church that I can imagine that doesn't water down to like abstention. So like it's got boycotting, which is sociological concept, and animal products, which is like a physical definition in any item with its origin in the body of an animal. So that includes leather and stuff. So plant-based doesn't do it because people can cheat, be mostly plant-based and only eat plant-based food. An animal products boycott includes leather and all any item from the body of an animal, and it's a really positive boycott identity boycott action that can be tied to an animal rights advocate identity. In that, these are people who feel committed to the action and won't go against it unless they're in like desert island situations. And so like any negatives you can think about in my definition, I think are outweighed by in comparison to other definitions. Like I'd much prefer to define veganism as a boycott and then get to compare it to the Israeli occupation government boycott till hopefully one day is ended. The South African apartheid government until that government was ended. The Montgomery Buscott Company apartheid rules until they were ended. Then originally the term boycott started in this like radical context of peasants fighting this Irish colonial landlord. So it was a protest aimed at withdrawing support from his shops, his land, and until his power was ended. It was like a protest to get rid of it. It wasn't a temporary thing. It's this really positive thing. So it's a big church, but it has this positive component to the definition. And other definitions often like don't include people who are like vegan. They like really good activists like Food Not Bombs Houston, who go out and feed the homeless and buy vegan food to make soups and stuff, but also rescue bread from supermarkets that has like whey in it, like so it's like freaking vegan. So they use the sharing of free food, exchange of information, and dialogue as a means of promoting social justice, cultural exchange, and horizontal organizing and mutual aid. And they bring only vegan or over-lacto vegan products to the public, and they agree not to sell or otherwise profit from any kind of donations given to them. So this is really cool advocacy. This is really like positive definition that we can use in the world that lots of different social political movements can pick up and use, and we can like be excited, like hopefully get them into the animal rights movement as well. But if the anti-racist movement wants to use it to increase the health of the local community or whichever movement, it's like a tactic. Yeah, so that's a lot. Yeah, go for it.
So I guess to like really drive this home very short and simply, it's like the foundation of what makes us drive towards a boycott is the fact that we value some animals, or it could be a variety of reasons. If it's difficult to make a moral obligation subjectively or objectively, if you can't really make or try to make a objective or subjective moral obligation that's sound and valid in some shape or form, then I would make an argument that it is difficult to keep someone to condemn said behaviors. Number one.
Okay.
Number two is when I was referring to people in poverty might, the identity itself is something that would be more so marketable to people in the first world who are in a position to think about boycotting. Boycotting looks more like a privilege to someone living in the third world, and to have this discussion with them about to boycott or not to consume it could almost come across as patronizing or insulting when someone doesn't have resources, if it is the case that animal-based products in their Pacific area, which is not the majority of times in third world nations, because third world nations tend to eat more so plant-based, but if their primary affordable income, whether they're a farmer or whatnot, or resources for food or protein or calories is animal-based products, talking to them ideally about sentient-based ethics, I think would actually be a greater way to start to actually help build someone's position so that they end up boycotting these types of industries. Third off, like as an example, if somebody could technically boycott these industries because they don't like the idea of someone profiting off of it, but at home they physically abuse their dog or cat, and if it is not condemned within the vegan movement, somebody could just end up thinking to themselves at any point that veganism is pointless. It's a boycott without necessarily any meaning. And that's sort of the issue that I have with his definition. Now, what can I agree with him on? Maybe it is the case that this would be faster, but maybe it is also the other case of everything else that I said. It's more marketable to people living in poverty, because from my experience being an animal rights advocate, when I have the discussion that veganism is not about just what we buy and what we eat, it's about animal-based ethics. And if we can talk about it, people are more receptive to hearing about it that don't have the resources. If I just make the argument that if at some point you actually have the option to, you can do this, and I'd still consider you a vegan, even if you don't have the resources right now to do said action. And then last but not least, there's also people that might, people who are plant-based, or people who are vegan, or people who identify as vegan in the first world who have more resources. Tomorrow they might be homeless and have little to no choice to what they eat. You know, at that point, if they can no longer boycott these industries, would they still be considered vegan? So with that being said, these are some of the criticism I have, is that there's a potential possibility for both, and I would take my position. I'm going to mute myself.
Sorry? What do I mean by self?
Oh, no, I said I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. What do I mean by selfhood? That's a complex philosophical question. So yeah, I mean the two. If you explain veganism as a boycott, the two images that are going to come to mind straight away are the biggest comparative place that mine will go to is South African boycott and the current Israeli occupation boycott. And it was kind of more promoted by people in the developed world, or like Europe, America, but that's because they had more time on their hands. Obviously, they can put more time into like charity work when they're not when they don't have like a populace that is so forcing to scrape by, and so it's an action, and I think like I don't see, like you're saying that you can advocate to people who are very poor, that they can still think of themselves as vegan even if they have to forced into situations in the third world.
Mind if I interject real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
So I would like you to explain what, I'm not familiar with what the boycotts were. Like, what were they about? So this is, to me, this is like you're bringing up something that I have no knowledge about. So on one hand, this gives you a chance to misinform me. On the other hand, this gives you a chance to persuade me. Honestly, so I'm not trying to be a dick here. It's just I don't know what you're bringing up here.
Okay, so you've never heard of the boycott campaign? Like you've never thought
for South Africa or Israel? So like, is this about the Israel-Palestine issue? Is that what you're talking about?
Right. Well, so the most like newsworthy, interesting, or most talked about boycott campaign in the world at the moment is a boycott campaign, as a boycott of Israeli products, mostly like fruit on the shelves with like really clear like flag symbols on it, so that you can economically damage the economically protest Israeli occupation. So like settlements Israeli government citizens starting up businesses on in more so in the West Bank. It's like but also in Israel, until like some political until hopefully our governments like stop giving subsidies and political support to them as much as possible, but also so that Israel eventually changes its way, like it did with like South Africa did under a boycott pressure against apartheid.
So what about so basically both of which are boycotts that were happening in the first world. Am I correct?
Mostly in the first world, as to support the third world, yeah.
Okay, so mind if I give some interjections, or would you want to make your point? It's because like, let's
do back and forth. It's good.
Okay, yeah, because like I want to stay on point here. So like one of which is, when did someone start that boycott? So I could say, well, this certain idea is to boycott Israeli or South African governments, whatever. But if
Mm-hmm.
there's not a moral obligation,
Mm-hmm.
then it's difficult to get to that next step. So what I'm saying is, by making a moral obligation, that is how
Mm-hmm.
we get to that next step. And this is
Yeah.
the difficult part that I find with your definition, is that it's defining it as a boycott. But how do we get to a boycott? I would argue we need to get to that boycott from, let's say, a moral obligation. So if we give this
Mm-hmm.
title, or this ideology, or sorry, if we give this identity, this
Mm-hmm.
title, if we give the term vegan, if we hold value to it, to people that actually tend to boycott, but that might not necessarily have value for sentient rights, it's much more difficult to make a moral obligation. And I would make the argument it makes it more difficult to get to that next step. So this is why I think my definition, even though it is complex, even though it is big, I think it
Mm-hmm.
focuses on that very issue. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the vegan society definition, I think it's not a very good definition,
Mm-hmm.
and I can explain why, and I can also explain why I think mine is better. And we can eventually move to that in this conversation if you want.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you a
Well,
chance to speak.
sure, sure. So we both disagree with the newer vegan science definitions. I'm talking about. I'm talking when I kind of defend the originalist
Wait,
vision. Mhm.
how many definitions were there? Because I think I've only heard of two, and I think they were both pardon my language. I think they were both
There's-
just
yeah,
they just really make me want to blow my brains out, both of them.
yeah. There's at least four. So, what I'm talking about is like a historical through line. Like, not that any. No, I'm not happy with either four, but I'm saying of the four or more, whatever, how many definitions they tried to come up with. Um, the first ones were kind of at least trying to represent like the kind of historical phenomenon of why the society came about, why people were avoiding all animal products and doing it with this kind of social commit, with a kind of like desire to end the industry, which is kind of a boycott perspective. So yeah, like the very first one was Donald Watson trying to kind of encapsulate this vision of veganism being about abundance in nature and like an expanding of opportunities, like eating like tens of thousands of plants rather than just the same meat and potatoes. And it was veganism is something like um, uh, eating seeds, nuts, plants, and all the abundance of nature. Um, in the plant world, and so and then um, and then colloquially veganism is like people who avoid all animal products, and yeah, I think so. Like within these like this like circle of colloquial and most like commonly thought about definitions, for how people relate to vegans, it's about people avoiding animal products and doing it with a interest to at minimum process the industry and how the products came about in order to stop them from ever and end the industry and stop them ever
Right.
being produced again. Um, so I make the point of saying it's one campaign tactic among many aimed primarily at achieving the end of the animal agriculture industry, and obviously um, the principle has to come from somewhere else because it's an action. But I think so. What I was originally going to say is, it feels like it doesn't feel very like optics, very good optics to be like. I can't imagine people in the third world identifying as vegan, even though they can never be able to put it into practice. It's like I'm really like looking forward to doing this in the future. But Mhm.
Ishka, so there's a few things I want to
Mhm.
bring up. One of which is association, one of which is some of my conversations with people. So I know
Mhm.
it's very anecdotal, but I think
Mhm.
it is like I have, over 2 years of experience as an advocate. I started
Mhm.
around the end of 2019. So, and then I also wanted to talk a bit about like I wanted to go back to like the basic foundations. So I think I'll just start with the basic foundations. So like
Okay.
where it becomes marketable is like where you convince someone that it's moral obligation. Now, why is that more why do I think that's more marketable is because it brings up the question of values first and or consideration. it brings up important ethical questions before we even bring up the subject of boycotting. And I think getting someone to think about those things first is why I personally have seen such a great improvement with talking to people in the third world, talking to people who don't have opportunities. I have someone in my Discord server who sometimes will have to eat animal-based products because he lives with his family. This guy has fasted for days. He has built muscle off of eating like protein powder, plant-based protein powder. He has gone up and beyond what so many vegans I know would ever do for the animal rights movement. And I actually consider him an ethical vegan, and a big part of like me convincing him of his positions and me helping him develop those positions is me talking about the ethics. Because if I just said you had to be able to boycott the industry, if you can't boycott the industry, then why should he consistently actually uphold that type of behavior? And that's where it breaks down, is that if we build the foundations, it can help someone continue said actions. So building foundations philosophically helps someone consistently build through these types of behaviors. And then association is, I like, for example, if we start giving we start allowing people to identify, or maybe that's not the right word, but more or less if we create a definition that encompasses or includes people who are boycotting the industry, if we create it socially acceptable to call people vegan who abuse their pet dog, somebody who, let's say, abuses their wife and threatens to kill their dog to keep their wife there. Like, somebody could also find other ways of financial exploitation that's not commonly found in the animal agriculture industry. Amy Fitzgerald did a study of, I think, like 13 women's shelters, and she actually found that a common reason, I can't remember if it was like I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's very common that men will actually try to threaten to kill the pet to keep the woman there. I can't remember if it was 20, 40, 60%. I'll probably give you the study, but it's actually, can you give me a second? I can actually go look at that study right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so one sec. So
a few moments later,
20 to 88% of women reported not wanting to leave, according to Amy Fitzgerald's study, their partner because of fears of not being able to bring along their pet. And actually, a common reason why some women will not leave their spouse is potentially because of their spouse threatening to abuse their pet if their spouse leaves. And when it comes down to it, one of the most common reasons why people harm pets in the household is actually to control someone in the household. And one of the other reasons is, out of 5 common reasons, is to discipline someone in the household. It's 5 or 4. And when it comes down to it, there's also creative loopholes for other means of actually financially exploiting animals. Like, for example, somebody could beat the crap out of their spouse, they could beat the crap out of their pet and threaten to beat the crap out of their pet if their spouse doesn't pay for their bills and stay with them. So there's other means of exploiting animals that might not traditionally be in animal agriculture. So somebody could use animals as leverage, or sentient beings as leverage, to make a financial gain. So like, this is also another loophole issue I have. And I put the study actually down below. This study goes through like a review of multiple different actual women's shelters, and it more or less tries to make the argument for having more protection for pets.
Well, so is the argument you're making that someone would identify as vegan, and then they'd have a stronger chance of other people knowing that they are, like, I know that some vegans start charities to rescue dogs of abusive partners or temporarily to. So is the argument that because if they more feel better able to identify as vegan, then they're more likely to find people to do that with them? Is that your argument?
My argument is more or less somebody could identify as vegan and do those behaviors technically. Like, depending on how we define animal agriculture, like
the person being abused can defend themselves. It's good if even if they're not boycotting animal products. Is that your argument?
No, I'm saying it's good. I'm saying it's good that they boycott animal products, but I'm saying technically people can find other ways to exploit animals that would not technically financially exploit animals that are not technically within animal agriculture, like the example I gave.
Yeah, of course.
And I also these are real unfortunate issues. Like
Okay.
one study found, I think out of like 107 women,
Mm-hmm.
there was a small portion of the women that have actually committed a crime because their
Mm-hmm.
spouse threatened to harm their pet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's frightening when you think about this. And I use
Right.
this for arguments for pet rights. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and this would go into the arguments for the animal empathy link, but that's neither here nor there. But to really get to the point in which I'm saying, my argument is somebody could find creative ways to harm animals. Like premise one, a common reason for harming animals is to control someone in the household. Premise two, somebody could threaten to kill or harm an animal if their spouse or someone in the household does not pay for certain financial responsibilities in the house. Conclusion: somebody could actually contribute to animal exploitation and make gains financially and call themselves vegan with your definition.
Right.
Unless like depending on how you define animal agriculture.
Yeah, no, I'll bite the bullet right now. Like you could be Hitler and like commit a genocide and be boycotting animal products and still think of yourself as vegan and doing vegan actions.
Mhm.
Um, like it's an action. Like I think the best way to advocate that more people in the world boycott animal products is to think of veganism as an animal products boycott. But in the very next sentence, it's I derive my principle for why I'm doing this action ideally from an animal rights perspective. But I don't see how you a person boycotting South African apartheid could be like could be trying to explain to someone like I'm taking the action of boycotting South African apartheid, and like some idiot could come in and say, oh well, if you that action doesn't stop you from committing a boycott against South Africans or women, and yeah, obviously like it's an action, it's not an ethical principle. That's not the purpose of the campaign. That's not the purpose of like advocating the campaign tactic. But like you just have to hope that most people are like reasonable, and the people that you're trying to advocate over are going to be the more reasonable ones that are like um uh, I'm I'm doing it for X, A, B, C, and D reason, and like it's an action, not an ethical principle. I'm advocating to you to do an action. I'm not trying to win you over to an ethical principle. Like I'll want to talk to you first to get to understand what the best ethical principle is to appeal to you. Like it can be consequentialist now. You need to know more about them. So in having this like kind of open big tent veganism, it's like you can have many caucuses within it. It's not yeah. So it has better
So
opportunities.
what
So
what
can I just sorry, come on.
so what about potentially somebody going out hunting? I mean, somebody could not contribute to
Yeah,
animal agriculture and be a hunter. They could go kill
but
animals.
and as an animal rights advocate, I would fight against that. I'd join other
Well, yeah,
campaigns
but that
too.
but
Mm-hmm.
that person could be considered vegan.
They could, because we need like the same way. I don't want to be like really hostile to reducitarians because someone who's a reducitarian is like maybe they can be like really depressed and like just trying to force them onto veganism can be like just make them like lose all will to even do reducitarianism. Like we need these like intermediary steps.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So that's the whole discussion there for me. Like I'm never gonna like disagree with you on like why we need animal rights and why we need animal rights principles. But it's to try and make people not be shy of identifying as vegan. As like understanding this historical progression of like how the vegan term came about, how vegans came about, and so what's really interesting about your example about people abusing partners' pets is that's like that's a common that's mostly like the what the struggle there is like why people can't leave the relationship is mostly like an anti-sexist struggle. It's like people with social conditions are thinking they need men for protection or they like or a classist struggle like they can't own their own house or whatever. So these are all like these are all campaign struggles that we need on our side, and or civil rights and social justice struggles that are all their own movements, that we need to ally with. And when, like, to the extent I want to ally with them, but I don't want to make veganism exclusive to. So say the person being abused was didn't sign up for all these, like, being against hunting, being against all these, like we need like a term that people can identify with, like vegetarian at minimum, and then vegan like better, and then animal rights better, because like that person being abused could find community with vegans just doing this minimal action of boycotting animal products, and then be more likely to know like animal rescuers who can help them out in that situation. So we need veganism to be this action that is applicable, that any campaign group can pick up, and it's not purely associated with animal rights. It's a campaign tactic. Like that's the beauty of this definition.
Okay, so so you think the beauty of your definition is it's a campaign tactic, right?
Yeah. So with the exact thing that you brought up about this identifying a problem that's both like sexist problem, a capitalism problem, and class problem, and vegan problem, all these social justice movements and the animal rights movements can all like use veganism as a boycott tactic to find allies, to find people so the person who's worrying about their pet going to be abused, they need community, and whether it's in like animal rights community or whether it's in the sexist community, by acknowledging that they want to be part of this tactic, they can find people who are willing to like help them out of that situation.
Okay, so there's a few things I want to talk about. One of which is being shy, one of which is like the moral foundations, so marketability, one of which is hunting, one of which is like collaboration with other social justice. So one of which is just with hunting. So, well, like for example, someone being a hunter and being vegan. So like what is the purpose of boycotting the animal agriculture industry? There can be many different reasons. Somebody could be environment, somebody could be ethics for the animals. But the problem is if more people started hunting instead of eating plant-based, we'd still end up with the same problem. So it doesn't defeat much of the same issues that we might struggle with. Now, could there be less people hunting in general just because of where they live? Sure, but we'd still have some of the same issues when it comes to not only violations of, I guess you'd say, the animal rights, or animals being killed, but also it comes into other problems when it comes to potential ecosystems with humans potentially overhunting. So that's one issue I have. Second issue is like people being shy. So I think my definition is one of the most inclusive definitions for reducitarians, because I could say a reducitarian or a vegetarian on a spectrum is more vegan than an omnivore, your typical average person, but I don't think they are a vegan. So I could say vegetarians are more vegan in comparison to an omnivore. A vegetarian who doesn't consume a whole lot of dairy. So I think my definition is very inclusive, because I make it into a spectrum rather than just a binary, this or that. So for example, certain actions could be more vegan, certain actions could be less vegan. And I think there's a beauty in recognizing the spectrum that we already use in linguistics to then our definition. Third thing is, what was it? When it came down to like the moral principles, so I think what the point I was trying to drive home with my friend is, if he could not consistently boycott animal-based products, I don't understand how I could have convinced him to, there's a possibility he could have developed these ethics on his own, but by having a discussion on ethics and by convincing him of ethics and not to boycott these industries as my message as a vegan. Because the term vegan in and of itself is a message. It's a marketing idea. We can agree on that, right? Like the term itself. So by making the term the message, by making it about animal ethics, I was able to convince him to continue boycotting the industry even if he's not consistent. Because some people can't consistently boycott the industry. And I think that's the beauty of my definition. I think that's the beauty of a really good definition focusing on animal ethics, is it drives someone to consistently try to boycott even if they fully can't. And when it comes to what was it, collaborating with for example, collaborating with other. So I guess my last point would be, actually before that, is people calling themselves a vegan. who are hunters and people who abuse their spouse to find it, abuse pets to abuse their spouse financially. I would make the argument that a lot of ethical vegans out there, and I know this is appeal to popularity, but I think popularity is relevant when we come to definitions. The vast majority of vegans out there, their ethical principles would not align with that. I would even make the argument that yours wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like what drives a boycott are these ethics, these underlying ethics. And when it comes to the subject of aligning ourselves with other social justice movements, I think by making this my definition about sentient rights and the amount of privilege a sentient has, I think that aligns itself with other social justice movements, in like almost so much so to the point where it just naturally evolves into it, because it's not necessarily just about animals, it's about sentience actually, because you kept saying animal rights, like so for example, like I wouldn't say it's vegan to go genocide a transformer. Like in a hypothetical, if they were transformers, if I could genocide them, I wouldn't say that's vegan. If there were aliens from another planet, and if that our definition of animal didn't include aliens, you could justify genociding aliens and eating them. So I think the beauty of actually having it about sentience and about privilege, and keep in mind, like I'm not trying to use privilege in a loaded term, whether this be for other social justice movements. I mean, I'm just using privilege of like legalities and like things that we can statistically analyze. So when it comes down to it, the reason why I think it's a powerful message to actually talk about it is it can actually encompass any and all social justice movements, and it can sort of be somewhat of a part of any of them when it comes to valuing a sentient being.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
so.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's mostly it, but I know that was a mouthful. Thank you.
No, that's good. So one of the things you said there was that like most vegans would be against hunting would be against their morality, but like that can be applied to loads of things. Like most vegans, because they'd be against like slavery, they'd be against like racism. Like so I've got a great quote by Gary Franconi, who's like the most like Puritan abolitionist, anti like even pest control vegan. Deontological, but he makes the point that quote, we think it's unhelpful to say, for example, that a person who is sexist is not a vegan. A person who is sexist is not an abolitionist, as we use the term. That's like a particular approach within veganism. But as sexist can be a sexist vegan, there is a tendency on the part of some vegans to use the term so broadly that it becomes shorthand for all the elements of that person's view of ideal morality. And that simply causes confusion. So, like, we want people to identify with the action as like a useful campaign tactic. It's not something that defines everything about them. It's one one action that is related to like a particular ethical outlook on life. But it's like a specific ethical outlook. It doesn't relate to everything in the world.
I would like to actually, and before you go too far, and I'd actually like to respond to that criticism.
Go on.
Okay, so once again, that's why I said it's actually primarily focused on non-privileged human sentient beings. I would make the argument that humans have privilege, a lot of privilege, and that's why I would say it's not. Even though I'd say it's being sexist is maybe like depending on your definition of sexist. So let's just say if we refer to sexism as wanting to decrease the rights of a sex, just so we're not including someone making a joke or somebody who like a girlfriend who gets stumped and says a bunch of mean things because she's bitter,
Okay.
So let's just exclude the minor things, and we'll focus on a major thing. Someone who actually believes a certain sex deserves less rights or something. I would say that is by far less vegan, and in a lot of ways not very vegan. But I would make the argument overall someone could still be very vegan on a spectrum, and it comes down to a matter of opinion. And I would make the argument that they could still go up to many different aspects. Or if we take a lesser degree of that, somebody who just has a negative. Sorry?
It's gonna come back on that. Oh, yeah. Go on.
Well, actually, the second thing is if somebody has, let's say, a negative view of the opposite sex, or one sec. If somebody has like a highly a prejudiced charge against the opposite sex, well, I could say somebody could also have a prejudice against certain animals and still technically be vegan, or certain species. But I don't think having a prejudice towards a certain species is a very vegan thing to do. I think somebody could technically have a certain prejudice and still be vegan. So that's why I said it's kind of somewhere on a spectrum. And when it comes down to it, this is where like the level of consistency on a spectrum comes in. So like we might have different morals, we might have different ethics. So this is where my definition, it focuses on key similarities, but allows for a diversity of belief. So I would say like there's a certain threshold of which I would say you're not vegan. So for example, somebody believes that women shouldn't have rights. That's like more debatable. I guess I could technically say that. But if we have a world where women legally don't have rights and somebody is for the enslavement of women just like they are animals in a lot of ways, you could also just easily say that's not vegan. Just as like, or an even easier way, I could just run NTT, like name the trait. Like, what if we genetically modify humans? Anyways, Ishka, you go.
Right. So I just when you were saying like more or less vegan, it just like it just comes across so absurd to me that like so I understand what you're trying to do. Like you're saying that like vegan is this thing that like you can be like that these people with a certain caliber of ethics and like you can relate to other people as being close to that level or not. But most often, but like just using the word vegan, it just makes no sense. Like vegan has its etymology in a vegetable diet. It's like the shortening of vegetarian.
I don't know what that word means.
Etymology.
Yeah, could we use another word? I'm sorry.
It's just like how what's it called?
The history, etymology, the history, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The history of how the term came about, like the word origin.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember now. Yeah.
So yeah, it's just like when you're saying, oh, like this is debatable whether someone sexist is vegan or not. It's a completely different issue. Like like I am an anti-sexist. I'm a feminist. Like that's like one aspect to my ethical outlook. So like why are you trying to like force like into the NCT animal ethics argument? Like it's so can I just going back right to start?
Was that a question? Do you want me to go into that or no?
Well,
because you had a lot to say and I never gave you the chance. So do you want a chance to like rethink about what I said before? Because there's two things that I said that I gave you a lot. So I feel like I owe you a chance to address them. Do you want a chance to think?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know. I maybe I've lost track of it, but it's just.
Do you want me to reset what I said before to give you a chance to re-criticize?
Go on then.
Okay, so basically one of which is NTT. We can name the trait of differences between humans and animals, and ask like, what if true of how we treat humans would we consider to be not vegan? Like, so what is the trait that means treating a human to an animal, and like if we genetically modify humans, blah blah blah. Like I'm not gonna go into that. So the next thing is I brought up the spectrum and how the spectrum in and of itself allows for a different nuanced perspective because there's a greater complexity by viewing it on a spectrum, and by focusing on unprivileged sentient beings, somebody could definitely be more vegan by valuing the least privileged, particularly the animals that are being genocided for pleasure and the animals that are being used as slaves in the service industry. Next thing, I mentioned earlier about the ethics and how I convinced someone of ethics to continue boycotting when they couldn't consistently be plant-based. I mentioned earlier about hunting. I appealed to popularity that wouldn't really fall within most vegans' ethics when it comes to valuing sentient beings. And then when it came to subject of what was it? And obviously, popularity isn't always the correct thing, just because it's popular. So when it comes to the other things I wanted to mention, I think there's a few other things I mentioned, such as what was it? Financially exploiting somebody and marketability. I think I made that we both agreed that like it comes down to the marketability of something. And I was trying to make an argument that including people that are boycotting these industries without necessarily like a philosophical reason behind it, groups people that are philosophically charged into a boycott with people who are who embody every reason why they're boycotting something. Anyways, with that being said, I mean, like, there's other things I could say, but I'll say that for later. It's just, so I may have overwhelmed you, so I'm giving you a chance, Ishka, to better try and take me down. So I want to give you a chance to get some good jabs in. So did that give you a chance to get some good jabs in, or do you just need some more time to think?
I'm probably just tired and can't keep it all together. But
no. I'm trying to be charitable. So like I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I was too, like, if I interjected too much, but I really needed to.
Okay. No, I think you've presented your argument admirably. And yeah, I just want to make one argument that draws it back to the beginning, and then we can start trying to wrap this up. So you said that you think that your definition allows for like more of a spectrum and lots of like allying with lots of like people with different philosophical reasons. I'd just say that this 6-point reason, it can be like a useful guide. It's like an animal rights advocacy toolkit, but I just don't see the use of like the word, confusing the word vegan with animal rights. Like the vegan term came about for a particular reason. People seeing it as an animal products boycott that is not doesn't have to be tied to animal rights and like NCT arguments and all this, is much more beneficial because more people will, it's more marketable, more people can be open to identifying with this term. That's not more political movements going to feel willing to take it up, and more people are going to feel willing to use it, and then we'll achieve the end of animal agriculture fastest.
All right, so
well, one more thing.
No, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
So you got the 6-point definition. The very first one is vegans are people who ideally do not wish to make sentient beings suffer or cause said suffering. Like, I mean, even if you're just having this on like a leaflet and you're like giving out as like an interesting summary of things, like it opens the door to so many like useless arguments. Like we need simplicity. We need a boycott is a sociological concept. Animal products is a physical concept, and that's it. Like it has these historical practical ties that you can easily compare to South Africa and Israel. But so like a deontologist, someone is going to read the first principle and be like, oh, that's the primary thing you care about. Like no, I don't want anything to do with this movement. Like,
actually, I do need to interject. So like,
okay.
Vegans are people who ideally do not wish to make sentient beings suffer or cause said suffering, or value rights to life and liberty. So in other words, actually, yeah. So like, in the past, when I DM'd it to you, that was the older one.
Okay, sorry.
So like, yeah. So like, it actually. So like, somebody could. I'm so sorry. Like, I'm always changing. I'm always changing. I'm always evolving. So, let's give you a chance. Maybe. So like, yeah. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is some people want to reduce suffering. Ideally, some people want to not cause suffering. Some people want to value their life and liberty, which comes down to the individual. So once again,
there's going to be that. Sorry, go on.
No, I want to give you a chance. So if you want a chance to think about that or read it, like it's spelled. My spelling is terrible. My grammar's terrible. I know, but let's try to move that aside, Ishka.
No, it's good. So I mean, someone can have like really like weird existential, spiritual, nihilist reasons, and it's not like, I don't know. I don't think having this really verbose like trying to like legalistically like incorporate everyone through giving everyone like a little line and knitting them all together perfectly. I think it's going to cause more problems than it solves. Like all these reasons of why someone needs to be vegan. Like I don't even understand them. How can I be vegan if I don't understand all of them? Like but yeah, we need practical like marketability. Veganism is a boycott can be tied to all these historical things that people, you can really easily point to and understand, like the struggles of different people. Like as sorry, I make the point of saying it's one campaign tactic among many aimed primarily. Go on.
If you
What?
want to, you can stop, take a breather, and think, because you're tired. It's 5 p.m. where I'm at. Maybe it's late where you are. If it is
Yeah.
the case, then you can take a second, take a breather, and maybe think. Because trust
Well,
me, when I'm tired, I'm not my sharpest when I'm tired either. So
well, I'm not willing to do all the 6 points. Like I wanted to give one like very like concrete
okay.
answer to, but I want to wrap it up soon anyway. Like I just want to bring it back to like this is an action. If someone tried to attack it as if it's a principle, as if like if you were just holding to this and nothing else, then you're an evil person. Then they've got it wrong. They're attacking. They're doing a category error. Like you're attacking an action as if it's a principle. You like I advocate. I encourage people who want to promote this definition of veganism to like in the next sentence to say where they're coming from, where the principle is coming from. Like if someone spent their life specializing in like educating themselves in animal rights, then yeah, say the principle comes from them being an animal rights advocate. But if someone has spent all their life thinking about anti-racism, like there's loads of good vegan reasons to be an anti-racist. So like veganism doesn't have to have all this language in about animals and wildlife. Like we can like you can fit veganism to whatever you want it to be, and like not having this verbose definition helps that cause because it's explicitly a campaign tactic with practical uses in. So
all right.
yeah.
So I think Ishka brought up something very important I should have brought up earlier. When I actually give my like shortened definition, I just take 6 and I leave everything out. So when I go in for debates, I'll bring 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just so I can better defend it against every particular reductio. If someone says, "Oh well, you know what? You buy stuff from, stuff that's made in third world countries," I'll bring up that there is an institution in power such as the government, and as crappy as governments are, they do have a lot more power to defend human rights in comparison to, let's say, an animal rights organization that tries to advocate for beings that don't have rights. So if I wanted to actually shorten this down, I would just take up maybe even take away like service, slavery, addiction, pleasure, peer pressure, and I just might write use. So like just pleasure and use. So for example, like all the above leading to a way of life that seeks to uphold value under consideration for sentient beings above pleasure and use made from them. Not to say that you can't use sentient beings, however, to try and value and consider them above said use within your system of ethics. The spectrum of valuing sentient beings primarily focused on non-privileged sentient beings. So that's what I would actually have as like a nice short message. But when it comes to like the subject of like what was it like why I think this is like a good definition, even though it's like really big and robust, is it gives an answer for every possible question. Like I thought a lot about this. A definition doesn't inherently have to be simple, and trying to simplify something complex in and of itself could end up with a number of intellectually challenging situations. So my goal of this definition was to create a definition based on the philosophy that we share. So like to better explain this, if you try to like condense it to the point where, let's say, it's practical as possible, like for example, a Nazi might think, gassing the Jews might reduce suffering as much as, like, people could believe an insane amount of things. It's reducing this, that, third as much as practical as possible. And the problem is like when there's certain types of terminologies and there's certain types of words that require a new justification for every single environment that you're in, rather than actually flushing out not what we share, but also similarities that would be a little bit more concrete, that doesn't necessarily need an answer, a direct answer for every single situation that we're in. And there's certain things that require a new justification for every single circumstances that you're in that more or less could justify other problems. Like, for example, what people feel is unjustified suffering. A carnist could think eating meat is justified suffering. The problem right there. So that's where originally I created this. So I'm actually going to try and shorten this down. The marketability of the message would be number 6. The complexity of the message, to try and actually have a debate and defend against people's criticisms, I roll out the red carpet for the longer debate definition. But when it comes to Ishka, so I'm going to be charitable here. The positives to his definition is that it incorporates a simple behavior, and it's asking a certain behavior. And could it be the case that it is better to ending animal agriculture? It could be the case, but I would argue the latter. Now, the reason being is because I think once I actually flesh out all these reasons, I think once someone tries to pick apart the vegan definition, particularly to try and make an argument against a moral obligation, objectively or subjectively, for veganism, it becomes a lot more difficult when you have it really well fleshed out. And once you have an argument for moral, for moral obligation, it's much easier to not only be consistent to your own definition, but then it's more easy to believe in it. And this is where I have actually used my definitions to actually reconvince people to try and become vegan, who decided to no longer become vegan once they figured out there were issues with definitions. It's because my definition allows for a greater level of understanding of consistency within said values. So for anyone who's wanting to watch Ishka, or so Etheria, my Ishka, may I have this on my YouTube channel as well, or just on yours?
Yeah, of course. Anyone can upload this any channel.
Okay, so yeah. So I'll put Ishka's social media links, and you have what social media links?
YouTube, Twitter, anything.
Yeah, so he has YouTube, Twitter, etc. All in the description down below. I don't think I need to give all my other reasons that I stated earlier. Like there's other instances where someone could contribute to animal harm and still be boycotting, but when it comes down to it, give him a shout out. So my channel, for anyone who hasn't heard of me, I'm not just your typical stereotypical vegan. I'm right wing. I'm politically incorrect, but more importantly, I'm honest. I like to read about the science, and more importantly, I want to have discussions with people with different belief systems, and actually try to have discussions in pursuit of truth and fairness and honesty, which doesn't necessarily mean being polite. I'm not. So with that being said, if that interests you, you might enjoy my YouTube channel, and some of my recent content is very informative. And yeah, I have a lot of differing philosophies when it comes to veganism in comparison to most vegans. But yeah. So Ishka,
Okay.
do you wanna maybe give a message to my audience about your YouTube channel and what you're about, or is that uncalled for?
No, I'm happy to do that. I just, that was a long ending statement. I didn't feel like I've got to sum up like that. So
I'm sorry if it was too long.
No. I mean, if I can, just as long as I can, I'd like to do that right now myself. So just like in terms of, I think so. Yeah, I'm Ishka. I do like vegan philosophy archiving, comedy archive, do all sorts on my YouTube, and I've got a blog and activistjourneys.wordpress.com. So yeah, like I think this has been really interesting. I think the problem is that I'm arguing for like a simple definition for like historical practical use, and I feel like you've got like a really good set of like guidelines for like kind of debating and advocating someone over to animal rights, and that's great. Like I would probably use that myself, but but in terms of this, like trying to shorten it down to what you were saying about seeks to uphold the value and or consideration for sentient beings above products, services, slavery, addiction, profit, all that. Like I really reject that. Like so I can my animal rights advocacy is about drawing a line in the sand between human civilization and animal wildlife, and it's not necessarily about valuing animal life above products. It's about just wanting separate spheres of existence. Like so I don't think, like you can just read that if you put this on your screen, and people can just read this, but I don't think I'm viewing the value for the animal to live in the wild as being higher than the value a sheep would find on a semi-wild farm protected from predators and then turned into substitutable classes of meat towards the end of its life. Even though I think a fully wild habitat would offer more life for more animals, and not slaughtering would offer a more virtuous life for the human. It's not about substituting goods. Like the action is there to protest the industry and to end the industry, but that's it. I think that's the one campaign tactic. Above that, we can do loads of different campaign techniques.
I think I'm viewing that.
So, yeah, my argument is simply that we ought engineer a set of circumstances in which a much higher number of animals are getting to express their capabilities in wildlife habitat. But I don't think that necessarily has to be hashed out to doing it for the animals, or because I'm viewing their life in the wild as a universally of higher value to ways you could individually treat them as means to an end, substitutable classes of goods or services, because I wouldn't necessarily. So yeah, I'm happy to leave it there. Go animal products boycott definition.
So I think like if I could just mind if you just give me a sec. I don't think valuing the life of animal to live in the wild.
A few moments later.
It's like turning over soil to.
Yeah, you talked about seeking to uphold value and consideration for sentient beings above products and services, but I'm saying most of the time I want to do that in fighting for them to have wildlife, but like in terms of lots of other situations like pest control, farming, like it's just confusing. Like it's not like I don't live my life by these like moral principles. Like yeah,
so
I have. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't know. I like if I could really shorten if I could like really make the short gist of it when it comes to actually valuing and or considering sentient beings. Like so that's just shortening it down to number 6. That's just a quick little message. So for example, yeah, one sec. So like for example, could that be valuing a sentient being? Sure, but actually, my opinion, I wouldn't consider that to be vegan. That's why if I was to go into a debate, I would use a more complex, more flush, like the whole, which also brings up the fact that they're not consistently replacing these products and services. So if I could try and actually better make an argument against that, I think one of the reasons why I include sentient beings is the subject of speciesism or discrimination by sentient beings. And I'm placing an emphasis on that. I remember something the Wikipedia definition said is that all types of veganism actually, what they all have in common is to try and reduce or eliminate speciesism. I can't remember their words. But I think something overwhelmingly that went through my mind is something doesn't necessarily have to be a species of animal. Now, with that being said, when it comes down to it, I can't remember everything else you said. But I think ultimately when it comes down to it, like for example, pests, there's like valuing a pest like that's a whole nother subject I'd want to have for another discussion. Because particularly pests, that kind of comes down to like your axioms, like can you really help something that consistently multiplies that's impossible to help or tries to cause harm to you or your life? So it's not the like I never said you cannot cause any harm to a sentient being in this definition. It's just a matter of valuing it. So in other words, or I even bring it back to number 1, where it comes down to like ideally, if you could avoid harming the sentient being, would you? And I think that ultimately sort of ties it better together. But with that being said, I think I'm kind of done with this discussion. And I think that he definitely gave some interesting subjects, but I would definitely be opening to have another discussion when it comes to like pests with Ishka.
Okay. Yeah, I just final second end point was like I just think you tie yourself in a knot, like trying to like have like, oh well, this ties back into the 1 that ties into the number 5, ties back to 4. Like any time someone brings up an objection, like it's like they're just like not everyone's going to understand them perfectly. It's like you need like this is a debate of like a definition versus debate tactics. It's not applicable to like a dictionary colloquial definition. We need like I'm talking about veganism coming about for a specific reason in history, and like it representing all these different people. Like trying to restrict these like 6 debate points. It's like, I know you're saying it's expansive in its own way, but it's like it's also like all this weird language that no one even know. Like it doesn't represent people even in the way that no one can understand it. Like you said about anti-species. Well, we've done like so many ending statements. Can we just like end it after, like?
Yeah, I think I'm done here. I think yeah.
Okay, but I just you made second long ending statement. I want to make one last statement. you talk about anti-speciesism. That's kind of like it's like tying in as like unifying vegans, and I'm just like completely like no, like but veganism as an animal products boycott has a really simple boycott sociological component, physical component. Doesn't need to be tied to anti-speciesism. Like it can be allied with lots of different movements that aren't anti-speciesist. Anti-speciesism is like very understandable in a human context, but it's very like confusing to try and for people to understand it when it's like whether squishing bugs when you walk down the road is anti-speciesist or not. So yeah, just like this is not it's not useful practical term to advocate.
Yeah, that's
for
why I
veganism.
didn't. That's why I didn't put like. That's why I didn't necessarily say eliminating speciesism. That's why I was
I
never
didn't
in
say you
there.
did.
Yeah. But I think we're done.
Okay, cool. Good discussion, man.
Actually, a wonderful discussion. So I'm going to upload this unlisted to my channel. So I think we're pretty much done.
Okay. Cheers, man.